Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the third army basing video. Today we are looking at snowy winter bases. I came up with these when I first started Frostgrave, and what I wanted from these bases was that I wanted them to fit many different miniatures, and I wanted to be able to go back and do them so that they would fit in the future. Also, back when I started Frostgrave, I had a sort of long break from wargaming, so I figured that I would need to get stuff done fast and easy, because I was unsure of my painting ability. And also, at that point in my life, I had more money than I have now, which is why I chose to go with texture paints for the bases, because I figured, hey, it's a warband game, so it won't be that expensive to base them all with texture paints. Then I saw the monster list, and as you can see, painted up a whole bunch of those. This is just a fraction of it. I have basically painted up everything needed for the monster lists and in all the expansions. So that's what we are playing with today. Citadel texture paints, and we're going to make some interesting snowy bases. So here we have our 32mm base, as per usual. First week we did the totally basic concrete base with a bit of tuft on it, which already looks really boring next to the Nurgle Wasteland base. So let's see if we can keep it interesting. First thing I want to do is to make some rubble, and as we've done before, I'll cut out a piece of old sprue. And this time I don't want them to be as small and fractured, because now they're not just adding texture on top of the cork, now they are the texture, so to say. They are the basic elements themselves. So slightly bigger pieces, and I'll try to get some interesting shapes. And I find that sprue is really good for that. Another really nice thing to use for this is if you use Reaper bones and you rebase them to be on proper bases. The leftover bits of set bases are usually quite interesting to use for this too, because it's a softer material and gives different shapes and texture. So that should be more than plenty. Then we'll grab some super glue and just start to pick out where we want to add the rocks. And usually I'm quite liberal with this, because I know when I add the texture paint some of them will be obscured, and I want to make sure that there are still some visible rubble beneath the mud and the snow that we'll add in a moment. And once again, I usually do this when I'm done building the miniature, but before I start priming or painting or anything. And when we want to build on top, we just add a bit more glue. It can really do good stuff for a model to be complemented by some scenic stuff that's not only giving texture but also presenting a bit of differences in height. On top of that, I'll add a little skull. I love to add small skulls to my bases. This one is from Skybo. He does a great set of skulls with a lot of different in different stages of decay, one would say. They have a slightly long back head, but I find that is actually quite good for basing, because they'll take up that little extra space and stand out better. We'll just make it lean on this rack. So after that, we'll have to wait for the glue to dry, and then we can prime it. So with that, I've as usually mounted the base on a paint pot, and then we're gonna prime it using some Mechanical Standard Grey. If let's say if I was priming the model black or white or another shade of gray for that matter, I would paint in the mechanical standard gray as the next step on the base. And as always, I'll usually just do that when I was painting something else gray on the miniature. Like that, and then we just need that to dry. Right. The next stages I would usually do when I was all done painting up the model. And there is quite a bit of dry time with this, so I suggest having a hairdryer or along a assembly line, or at least having several projects going at once. The next thing I'm gonna add is the first texture paint, and that is Steel and Mud. And I don't have a texture spreading tool as sold by Games Workshop. Never did, don't really want one. What I do have is a clay shaper and some beat up brushes, and most of the time the old beat up brushes do the job quite well, but the clay shaper can be good for if I cover too much of a rock or stuff like that. So I'll take a good healthy amount and just started to paint it out across the area around the rocks. And it doesn't matter if a bit of it gets on the rocks, that's totally fine. I just don't want too much. And you can easily use this to create more height differences, making little bumps and stuff, but and when it starts to dry out, you actually can't help but making little bumps and stuff. The first part I had was so dry that I have to thin the entire contents of the pot down with medium, and then there would be these chunks creating extra rubble in it. And funny enough, that turned out to be quite fine. I managed to use the entire contents of the pot anyway. And as this is texture paint, it's a really good idea to be sure you remove everything around the edges. And as advertised, dry time. So next we're gonna give the base an all over shade of Nuln Oil. And back to the hairdryer. So there are still some pockets of Nuln Oil that haven't completely dried, but we can go on to the next stage. That will be to paint the skull with Sandry Dust. And then we need the Sandry Dust to dry, which is thankfully quite fast. And then we'll give it an all over shade, just the skull, a shade of Agrax Earthshade. So, Earthshade. And as said, that is just for the little skull here. You could use Sepia instead, but I find that Earthshade gives a better contrast and makes it blend well with the overall theme of the base. And once again, hair drying time, and this time we really want all the wash on the base to be completely dry before we go on. Next, I want to give the entire thing a dry brush of Taminato Stone. So this will be especially focused on the skull, but also for the rest of the base. And you can be rather liberal with this. Next, I'll take some Mourn Mountain Snow and start to build up our winter theme for reals. And it might seem a bit brutal to just put this texture paint all over where we just were, and all the work we put into that, but I find that it's worth it, because the stuff you do see in between would not look as good if we didn't. So, like this. And we don't need this to dry fully before we go on, so while it gets a moment, let's talk a bit about tuft. Army Painter makes some tuft called Tundra Tuft, which I've used on quite a few. It comes with some powdery snow effect on it, which is quite cool for some models. They also make this, can't remember what it's called though, but it starts white and then ends almost black out in the end, which also has a really nice wintry theme to it. And then of course there is the Winter Tuft that we used in episode 1 of this series. And what I've done is I've used a bit of all of these three around these kind of bases. Just at random and whatever I found first. But for this one, let's just use these two. Cut one of them up, so we have 3 little tufts. And then we add some super glue, and as said, I don't really care that the last layer of texture paint is not dry yet. It's quite alright. Like that. And then, without hesitation, I'll grab a bit of Valhallan Blizzard. This is totally optional. I haven't actually used it on most of my Frostgrave bases, but since I have it, I thought we might as well play around with it a bit. Also, I don't really bother highlighting the snow effects. I've seen people do that and it can look good, but I found that it is a waste of time and doesn't really do anything. I don't want a lot of Valhallan Blizzard, just a little bit to give the snow a bit of interesting texture and make it seem like it's been falling over several periods. And I find that often you need to work a bit more with this than most other texture paints before it looks right. So just again, use an old brush and be prepared to stab at it for a while. And with that, now we actually do want it to dry a little. Just for a minute or so, or 20 seconds with the hairdryer. Then we're ready to add the base trim, and then we'll be done. So for the base trim on these bases, I prefer to use Naggaroth Night, and that is simply because it enforces the feel of cold. It makes the miniatures on the snowy bases give an even better impression that they are in a very, very cold environment. Whereas warm browns or similar colors would betray the impression we're trying to give. You could also just go with, of course, as always, plain black or a dark blue, but I find that the dark blue can be way too dominating. Actually, first time I used this purple for a base was on my Blood Bowl troll, because I needed him to have another color than the regular guys. And then I just grabbed something and figured it looked pretty good and was thinking, could I use this on something? And then along came Frostgrave. So we'll let it dry and then we'll take another look at it. So here we have the Frostgrave winter theme base. Would probably fit really well with the new setting they came up with for Age of Sigmar Skirmish 2. I like it a lot. I especially like how easy it is. It does take a bit of time compared to some other basing methods, but it is something you can do while watching a movie because it takes no concentration whatsoever, and it from my experience it always ends up looking good enough and fit well with the other bases, and also it allows for you to play back and forth with it quite a lot, which is absolutely a bonus in my mind. So that was today's episode of Army Basing. I hope you all have a nice weekend, If this is your first visit to Aaron Painting, be sure you subscribe before you leave. There will be more of this and tons of other content. I upload at least 4 videos a week, usually more. And that's all for now, folks. So take care and bye-bye.